good. Wow, amazing. Computers. Um, who knew? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm Julia. I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things, which is strace, and I'm going to explain to you what that is. So, let's get started. The first disclaimer is that strace is Linux only. I use Linux. You may not use Linux. There will be alternatives for you at the end. And the concepts like map to things which are not Linux. But strace is only for Linux. Linux. So, we write programs. We debug things. Normally when you debug a program, you will do things like look at the source code, or like add print statements, or use a debugger, or know the programming language that your program is written in. strace is a debugging tool that requires none of these things. You do so you can have like a random program, and you can run it, and you can learn what it's doing. Am I a wizard? strace lets you be a wizard. Okay, so let's break this down a little more, because we believe that the world is ultimately logical, maybe. Right. So the way this works is I have a computer, and in that computer there's a hard drive, right? And sometimes I'll open a file with Python, and I'll be like f equals open file, and then I'll read data from it. And things I do not worry about include how to write an IDE driver, but specific details of the file system I'm working with, and a bunch of other things, right? And the thing that deals with all of these things, writing data to the network, all of your hardware, all of your file system is your operating system, right? Which could be Linux or OS 10 or Windows. And we use a lot of APIs, right? Often web APIs. But your operating system also has an API for things like reading files, communicating over the network, the TCP/IP protocol is implemented in your operating system. And system calls are your operating system's API. So what strace does, and the reason that it's magical, is it lets you see which system calls your program is calling. And the only way to open a file is by you calling the open system call. Which is almost true. But yeah. Right. So I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite system calls. One of them is open, which opens files. One of them is exec, which starts programs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about send to and receive from, which are for sending data over the network. So the first thing I want to explain is how do I even strace, right? So there are a few ways. One way is you run a program for the command line, and then you put strace in front. And then suddenly you're spying on your program. And it'll start printing out things. So you'll see that this starts with execv. Execv is the name of the system call. So the very first thing that happens when you start Google Chrome is it starts Google Chrome. Which is kind of tautological. But this makes sense. If you're starting a program, the operating system has to start the program. And then there are more things. Something to be wary of is that when you run strace, you'll see a lot of output like this. And this is a little bit difficult to read, to say the least, right? But you can see things that you might recognize. You might be like, oh, Vorbis, that's og Vorbis. That's some kind of audio driver. I guess Chrome wants to have a library for this audio driver, right? That seems logical. What else do we have here? I don't really know. More og. I don't know what this means. But I know what some of it means. I've already learned something about Chrome. So, when I usually run strace, I'll limit it to a specific set of system calls. I'll be which system calls do I really want to know about? So let's say I was really suspicious of my Google Chrome, and I thought it was spying on me and on my files. I could use strace and be show me every time Google Chrome opens a file. I want to know all of them, and I need to audit Google Chrome. So I could do that. And I often do a lot of filtering, so it'll open libraries and stuff, which I didn't care about. So I strace Google Chrome, and I was oh, let's just look at things in my home directory. So I did, and then I was I found consent to send stats. I was what is it? what have I consented to? I don't know. Right? So I went and looked at that file, and I found some kind of key, and I was like, okay, I guess, and like maybe I probably clicked yes at some point, right? But that's cool. We learned that Chrome is doing that. So the next thing I was thinking of, I was like, oh, well, so I know that Chrome runs these like sandbox processes. Like it like starts like one process for each tab, or maybe they're grouped together if there are a lot of tabs. I'm not a Chrome developer, I don't totally know, but we can look at that, right? So I straced it, and I was like, just show me like what processes it starts. And you'll notice I added the -f flag, which like follows forks, and will like also trace all of the sub processes. Like you can trace everything. It's the best. And we see that like this key here, that's like one of the arguments to Chrome Sandbox, is the thing from before. So it like opened that file and used it as a parameter. I don't really know. But that's something it did. So that's pretty great. And we could find out like how many processes, like how many like copies of itself Chrome started, if we wanted to know. That would be easy. And so another thing I did is I was trying to understand how like a distributed file system worked the other day. And so I was like using like the client, and I was like, oh, well, like what data is it sending and receiving over the network? So I ran strace, because like strace is like legit my favorite thing. Like I was like on the train from Montreal to New York, and I was like, oh, I don't have an internet, it's not working, but I'll just strace some stuff. Like it's really fun. It's really fun. It's like a problem. Maybe I'll tell you about that another time. So I started looking at it, and I looked at like connect, and I was like, oh, the connect system call will connect to like an IP address on some port. That totally makes sense. And then it would send to that. This like BP thing is like the pool ID for the file in HDFS. So this was like something that I recognized, even though it may be like totally meaningless. But I was like, oh man, this is like actual stuff, and I can like see what it's sending over the network without like knowing how the program works at all. And it doesn't matter if it was written in Java or in Python or whatever, right? I can just look at it. And it was storing some data from Wikipedia. And when it came back, it came in the from system call, and there was English in it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's the data I saw. It came over the network, and I can see it. And you can do this like if you're communicating over HTTP, that has to go over a socket. Like it will be in a system call, there is no alternative. If it's over HTTPS, it'll all be encrypted and it'll look like nonsense, and you're kind of like stuck with that. Because like if you're using like SSL, hopefully it's being encrypted. Like you see if it gets sent over the wire, whether that's useful or not to you. But yeah, this is really cool. Another one of my favorite system calls is write. So you might have a process which like is logging data somewhere, and you might not know where, and you might like look at the documentation, but instead we are wizards. So instead you can strace it, and like you can attach to like a running process, and you'd be like, where are you writing, Apache? And you'll see the right system calls, because there's no other option. Like there's no other way to write to a file. You have to go through the operating system. You don't have a choice. Like the operating system does everything. And like that's not quite true actually, right? When like if you're just doing some computations, like if you're adding up a bunch of numbers, that doesn't go through a system call, right? Like that's not part of the API. But yeah, that's what I have to say. I have some advice for you. One piece of advice is to strace everything, because it's really fun. Like just like sit it. If you have like Linux and you want to know how this works, just start like stracing thing and being like, what does it mean? What is that system call? And sometimes like I go down that road and it's like a huge mistake. Like I'll be like at work and I'll be like, oh, I'll strace this, and I'm like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I'm really not doing my job right now. Like it's like not good. And then like hopefully I stop and like go back to doing work and not like trying to understand like view text better or whatever. Don't do it. Or do at home. There's a tool on OS 10 and Windows called Systig, and also on Linux, which is pretty new. It has a pretty web page. It looks cool. I haven't tried it yet. Maybe try it if you're not on Linux. It seems to like have a nice like command line interface, and you can like attach like Lua scripts to it and stuff. I made some notes for this talk. I've written like 7 blog posts about strace. It's really bad. That's me. Thank you.